For over a decade, two cops ran their precinct like it was their personal playground, pulling over who they wanted, harassing who they pleased, and bearing every complaint. But the day they stopped a quiet black man walking his dog, they made one mistake they would never recover from. Officer Raymond Kessler had been with the department for nearly 15 years. Darren Vaughn, his partner, came in 5 years later and learned quickly which lines you could cross and which ones you could erase entirely with the right paperwork. Together, they were untouchable, or at least that's what they believed. Kessler was the talker, smooth, sarcastic, and always ready with just enough charm to dodge accusations. Vaughn was the muscle, short-fused, aggressive, and carried his badge like a license to dominate. They had worked every shift from late-night patrols to community events, smiling for cameras one moment and shaking down teenagers in alleyways the next. The two of them were a unit, built on power, silence, and fear. Every neighborhood they worked knew the unspoken rules. If you were white, you were safe. If you were black or brown, you were on borrowed time. It always started the same way. A routine traffic stop, maybe a broken tail light, maybe nothing at all. Kessler would approach with that patronizing grin, already knowing what was about to unfold. Vaughn would hang back, hand on his belt, just close enough to keep folks on edge. If the person in the car asked too many questions, spoke too confidently, or looked too comfortable, the situation would escalate fast. It didn't matter if the person was innocent. It didn't matter if they complied. Their goal was never to enforce the law. It was to assert control, and every time they got away with it. Internal affairs, they were a joke. Complaints vanished into the system like smoke through cracks. Body cams malfunctioned. Witness statements were twisted until the victims looked like the aggressors. And when those victims were people of color, especially black men, the department barely blinked. Over the years, rumors floated, stories whispered at barber shops, community centers, and church basements. Folks talked about the way Kessler and Vaughn pulled people over for no reason, about how they shoved a young man into the back of their cruiser and lost the footage, about the single mother whose teenage son was booked for resisting arrest when all he did was ask why he was being stopped. But nobody could prove anything, and even if they could, who would listen? Their precinct captain called them effective. Other officers called them old school. They called themselves realists. But the truth was simpler. They were predators, and for years they hunted in plain sight. They didn't fear lawsuits. They didn't fear cameras. They didn't even fear getting caught because they thought no one was coming for them. Every time someone tried to speak up, they got discredited or silenced. And after enough of that, people stopped trying. That's how it worked. That's how they built their kingdom of fear. And like all men who confuse power with invincibility, they eventually went too far. It was a Tuesday afternoon when they saw him. He was walking along a sidewalk in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood just outside of Raleigh, North Carolina. The sun was out. A lawnmower hummed a few houses down. The man was dressed casually, gray t-shirt, black athletic pants, walking at a relaxed pace beside a large German shepherd. He looked ordinary, calm, in control. Too calm, Vaughn would later say. Didn't look nervous. Didn't look like he knew his place. His name was Jerome Marshall, and he had lived in that neighborhood for just under 6 months. A former Delta Force operator, now doing high-risk security consulting, Jerome kept to himself. His neighbors knew little more than the fact that he traveled often and always came back with the same quiet dog at his side. To Kessler and Vaughn, he was just another maybe, another face they didn't recognize, another reason to stop and assert authority. It didn't matter that Jerome had done nothing wrong. It didn't matter that he was walking on his own sidewalk with his dog on a leash. In their eyes, he didn't belong. Kessler eased the cruiser up beside him, that same smug grin spreading across his face. "Afternoon, sir," he said, like it was just a polite check-in. Vaughn stepped out of the vehicle, boots crunching against the pavement, positioning himself just close enough to be threatening, but far enough to claim otherwise. Jerome stopped, turned toward them slowly, calm, polite. "Afternoon, officers," he replied. And just like that, the game began. A game they thought they had played 100 times before. But this time was different. This time, the man they were trying to intimidate had nothing left to lose and everything to take back. This time, they weren't hunting. They were being watched. Jerome wasn't thinking about danger. He wasn't thinking about politics, race, or the weight of the world that seemed to follow him everywhere he went. He was just walking his dog. It was the first real moment of peace he'd had in weeks. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sidewalks, the light filtering through tall maples lining the quiet cul-de-sac. The German shepherd beside him, Duke, trotted with disciplined ease. His stride perfectly matched to Jerome's. The leash hung loose in Jerome's hand, but Duke didn't pull. He never did. He was trained, not just as a pet, but as a partner, a protector. Jerome took a deep breath, savoring the scent of freshly cut grass and distant barbecue smoke. This was his reset, these walks. After years spent in high-conflict zones, deployed to some of the most dangerous places on Earth, the silence of suburbia felt like a kind of luxury, a slice of normal. But even in that quiet, Jerome felt it. The eyes. It started with a jogger who glanced at him, then crossed to the other side of the street without breaking pace. A curtain shifting in an upstairs window, the slow roll of a minivan creeping past at 5 miles per hour, its driver doing the not-so-subtle double-take before speeding up again. Jerome had seen this before, back in Fayetteville, in D.C., in Denver. Anywhere he tried to fit in, where his skin tone made him a statistic before he ever said a word. But this wasn't a war zone. This was his neighborhood. He had the mortgage to prove it. The police cruiser turned the corner like it knew exactly where it was going. He clocked it instantly. Black and white Ford Interceptor. Standard city issue. Even from 50 feet away, he recognized the smug tilt of Kessler's head behind the wheel and the hunched, tight posture of Vaughn in the passenger seat. Jerome didn't change his pace, didn't reach for his phone. He simply kept walking. Duke's ears perked slightly. A low, nearly imperceptible growl rumbled in his throat. Jerome gave a soft tug on the leash. "Easy, boy," he murmured. The cruiser slowed, crawling to a stop parallel to him. Kessler leaned out of the window, his tone light, casual. "Afternoon, sir. Everything okay?" Jerome stopped, turned, stood tall, not confrontational, just grounded, the calm confidence of a man who survived worse. "Afternoon, officers," he replied, keeping his voice neutral. "I'm doing just fine, just out for a walk." Vaughn stepped out of the cruiser, boots crunching on the pavement. He stayed a few paces back, arms crossed over his vest. His eyes were already on Duke. "You live around here?" Kessler asked, his smile tight. "Yes, sir," Jerome said without hesitation. "Just over on Maple Ridge Drive." Kessler raised an eyebrow. "Don't think I've seen you before." "I travel a lot. Security contracting overseas. Just got back last week." Vaughn scoffed. "That's supposed to mean something?" Jerome didn't flinch. "Only answering your question." Kessler's grin widened. "Well, thing is, we got a call about someone looking suspicious. Black male, walking a big dog. Figured we'd check it out." Jerome's jaw tightened, but he didn't bite. He knew the type of bait this was. "I wasn't aware walking my dog qualified as suspicious activity," he said evenly. "You'd be surprised what puts folks on edge these days," Vaughn muttered, stepping closer, eyes still fixed on Duke. "That's a big dog," he added, voice laced with implication. Trained? Yes, sir, Jerome replied. Obedience, protection, very disciplined. Kessler glanced at Vaughn. Mind if we see some ID? Jerome could have refused. He had every legal right. But this wasn't about legality. This was about survival, and about knowing when someone already had their mind made up about you. Sure, he said, reaching slowly into his jacket. I'm going to pull out my wallet now. Duke shifted slightly, alert. Vaughn's hand hovered near his holster. Whoa, Vaughn barked. Control that dog. Jerome's voice was calm, measured. He's fine. He's trained. Just responding to your tone. Kessler chuckled. Let's just see that ID. Jerome handed it over. Vaughn snatched it, looking it over with disinterest. Well, look at that, he muttered, showing Kessler. Ex-military, Delta Force. Kessler let out a low whistle. Huh, that's supposed to impress us? No, Jerome said quietly. It's supposed to mean I know how to handle myself. There was a long pause. The tension stretched, invisible, but thick as rope. You know, Kessler said, handing the ID back with a smirk, we've got folks around here who get real nervous when they see someone who doesn't look like they live here. Jerome's eyes hardened. I do live here. Vaughn stepped even closer. Yeah. You got anything on you we should know about? No, sir, Kessler nodded. We're going to need you to step over here, just to be sure. Jerome exhaled slowly. I've cooperated. You have no probable cause. Kessler's smile turned cold. Then you got nothing to worry about, do you? And just like that, Jerome knew. This wasn't about suspicion. This wasn't about law. This was about power, about control, about two white officers who saw a black man walking confidently in a white neighborhood and couldn't stand it. Duke's body tensed. Jerome felt it through the leash. The racial lines had been drawn, and now the moment was tipping. Jerome didn't move. He stood exactly where he was, hands visible, posture still, voice calm. He'd faced warlords, insurgents, and ambushes in foreign deserts where hesitation meant death. But standing on this suburban sidewalk in his own country, under the gaze of two officers with itchy trigger fingers, he felt a different kind of danger, a kind that didn't announce itself with weapons or flags, but with suspicion and a badge. Duke hadn't moved either. The German shepherd was alert, head up, ears forward, but his body remained motionless, just like Jerome had trained him. He sensed the tension, read Jerome's breath, the subtle shift in energy that said not yet. The officers didn't understand that, didn't care to. Kessler stepped closer. You're real calm for someone who says he's got nothing to hide. I've got nothing to hide, Jerome said flatly. Vaughn narrowed his eyes. Then turn around, hands behind your back. Jerome blinked. Excuse me? Just for our safety, Kessler added, voice tight with false concern. Standard procedure. No, it's not, Jerome replied, jaw tight but voice still low. I'm not under arrest. I've cooperated. You've seen my ID. You've confirmed my address. I'm walking my dog. There's no probable cause. Vaughn stepped into Jerome's space, close enough that Duke growled, a deep, rolling sound that vibrated through the air like a low warning bell. I said control your dog, Vaughn snapped, hand drifting toward his holster. He is under control, Jerome said sharply. He hasn't moved. He's leashed. The only aggression in this moment is coming from you. But they weren't listening. They weren't looking for logic or de-escalation. They were looking for an excuse. Kessler reached out, grabbing Jerome's arm. That was the moment everything broke. Duke stepped forward, just one pace, protective instinct overriding years of training. He didn't lunge. He didn't bark. He simply placed himself between his handler and the threat. But it was enough. Vaughn's gun cleared the holster in one fluid motion. No! Jerome shouted. already moving to restrain Duke. The gunshot exploded. It echoed through the street, slicing through the air like a whip. Jerome staggered back as the leash jerked violently in his hand. Duke yelped, a sharp guttural sound, and crumpled. The world blurred. Jerome dropped to his knees, hands already pressing into the growing patch of red, spreading across Duke's tan and black fur. His fingers shook, soaked in blood. The pavement beneath them darkened as Duke whimpered, legs twitching, eyes wide with confusion and pain. "No! No, no, no! Stay with me!" Jerome gasped. You're okay, I got you. Stay with me." The officers didn't speak. Kessler's gun was still raised. Vaughn stood frozen, as if shocked by what his own hand had done. Jerome wasn't looking at them anymore. He was cradling Duke's head in his lap, stroking behind his ears, whispering commands through clenched teeth, trying to bring him back, trying to will the damage away. But Duke's breathing slowed. His body stilled. One last twitch, then silence. Gone. The scream that came from Jerome's chest wasn't human. It was raw, broken, full of pain no battlefield had ever carved into him. He didn't feel the weight of the knee when it slammed into his back. He didn't register the cuffs clicking onto his wrists, didn't hear the rights being read, didn't see the neighbors peeking through windows. All he saw was Duke. All he felt was the void. They shoved him into the back of the cruiser, metal against flesh, rage boiling in his blood like fire beneath his skin. He stared at the smear of his dog's blood on his shirt, his hands, his jeans. No one offered him a towel. No one said a word. At the station, the process was mechanical, cold, booking photo, ink on fingertips, sitting in a holding cell with nothing but flickering fluorescent lights and the ache of absence gnawing at him. He didn't sleep, didn't blink. Hours passed, then finally a door opened, and his sister Camille stormed in like a force of nature, civil rights attorney, known firebrand, all heels and fury, slamming a folder of legal documents into the desk like a grenade. "You're going to release him," she said, her voice calm but deadly. "Right now." "This was a misunderstanding," Kessler said from the corner, smirking like none of it mattered. Camille turned slowly. "A misunderstanding? You shot his dog. You assaulted a U.S. veteran in his own neighborhood. Do you know what's coming?" Jerome stood, still silent, still staring through them all. She turned to him, placed a hand on his arm. "Let me handle this," she whispered. "Let me take it to court. Let the system work." He didn't speak, just nodded slowly. But in his mind, he already knew. The dog was dead. But the truth had teeth, and now it was wide awake. The house was quiet, but not in the way that brought comfort. It was the kind of silence that pressed against Jerome's chest like a weight. The kind that made every tick of the wall clock feel like a hammer to the ribs. Duke's leash still hung on the hook by the front door, coiled neatly like it always had been. His water bowl remained untouched in the corner of the kitchen. Everything in its place, everything except Duke. Jerome sat at the kitchen table, elbows on the wood, fingers laced, his coffee long cold. He hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. The bloodstains on his shirt had been washed, but he still smelled it, still felt it on his hands. Every time he closed his eyes, it wasn't combat flashbacks that came. No bombs, no gunfire. Just the moment Duke's legs folded under him. Just the stillness that followed. Camille stood by the sink, arms crossed, watching her brother with the same fear she had learned to hide back in law school. She had known rage before, known injustice, but not like this. Not this personal, not this permanent. "You need to let me do this," she said, voice low. "I've already filed the complaints. We've got the media. Civil rights orgs are calling. This won't be ignored." Jerome didn't look up. "It already has been." Camille blinked. "Jerome, we just started." The internal review cleared them, he said, his voice calm, almost detached. No wrongdoing. No excessive force. They ruled it justified. She froze. That's not possible. It's done. He finally looked at her. His eyes were hollow, quiet, and cold. Camille stepped closer, voice rising. Then we fight harder. We appeal. We push it federal. We go after the department. And in the meantime, he asked, they're still on the street, still carrying guns, still stopping people who look like me. You think they're going to stop because the paperwork is stacking up? She said nothing. Jerome leaned back, jaw tight. I gave them everything. My ID, my respect, my silence. I let them push me, let them hit me. I held that dog back with everything I had, and they still pulled the trigger. He paused, hands balling into fists on the table. Camille, I did everything right, and it didn't mean a damn thing. His sister swallowed hard, her voice faltering. So what? You're just gonna give up? No, he said softly. I'm done waiting. Camille saw it then. Something behind his eyes she hadn't seen since he came back from deployment years ago. That quiet, methodical focus. The kind of stillness that came before action. The kind of resolve that couldn't be talked down. This isn't a war zone, she said, a desperate edge in her voice. He stood slowly. Feels like one. She moved in front of him, trying to block the hallway. Whatever you're thinking, don't. You can't come back from that. Jerome looked down at her. I'm not planning to. The room stilled. The words hung in the air like smoke. Camille's voice cracked. You go after them, Jerome, and they'll bury you. Not just legally. They'll spin the narrative. They'll make you the threat. I already am, he replied. The moment I stepped onto that sidewalk with brown skin and a confident walk, I was the threat. He moved past her. She didn't stop him. That night, Jerome opened the gun safe in the bedroom closet. Not the one the cops had seen during their visit. The real one, hidden behind false drywall, layered in lead, unreachable unless you knew what you were doing. Inside were tools he hadn't touched in years. Gear from another life, tactical gloves, surveillance technology, an unregistered sidearm, files, photos. He pulled out a manila folder labeled Kessler/Vaughn. He had started it after the first night they showed up at his house. Every movement, every routine, every bar they drank at, every corner they cut. He'd been trained to observe, to document, to anticipate, and now he had nothing holding him back. Duke had been more than a dog. He was family. He was protection. He was the last piece of a world Jerome had tried to build after walking away from violence. Now that world was gone. Camille was right. There would be no coming back. But Jerome didn't want to come back. They had taken everything, and now he was going to take it all from them. Piece by piece, step by step, with the precision of a soldier and the rage of a man with nothing left to lose. Calloway liked to drink where no one knew his name. A smoky bar on the south side of town, all flickering neon lights and stale beer. The kind of place where a badge didn't mean anything and the regulars didn't ask questions. He sat in the same cracked leather booth every night, knocking back double bourbons like water, flirting with the bartender like he hadn't left a wife and 2 kids at home. A man like him thrived on arrogance, the belief that no matter how dirty his hands got, no one would ever dare make him pay for it. That belief was about to shatter. Jerome had been following him for 4 nights, always at a distance, always in the shadows. Calloway never looked over his shoulder, never suspected. That's the problem with men like him. They only fear what they can see. At 12:43 a.m., Calloway stumbled out the back exit into the alley behind the bar. Perfect. Jerome had parked 3 blocks away and approached on foot, silent, precise. He moved like smoke through the dark. The alley had no cameras, no streetlights, just damp concrete and the steady clink of Calloway fumbling with his keys. Jerome struck without a word. A hard blow to the ribs sent Calloway sprawling. His head bounced off the pavement with a dull crack. The keys scattered. He gasped for air, choking as he reached for his sidearm, but Jerome kicked it away before he could even lift it. What the hell? Another punch, swift, surgical. Blood sprayed across the alley wall. Don't talk, Jerome growled. Calloway tried to fight back, but it was sloppy. Drunk. Weak. Jerome twisted his arm behind his back and slammed him face first into the bricks. You remember me yet? He whispered in his ear. Calloway's breath hitched. He didn't say anything, but Jerome felt it. The shift. The fear. Jerome let him drop, groaning onto the ground. Then he crouched, his voice low and cold. You murdered my dog, in front of me, for no reason other than power and hate. Calloway's eyes widened. You think this is revenge? Jerome asked. Number, this is justice, the old-fashioned kind. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small flash drive, and shoved it into Calloway's jacket pocket. On that is every dirty stop you've made, every falsified report, every complaint the department buried. I sent copies to 3 attorneys, 2 reporters, and 1 very pissed-off city councilman. Calloway moaned, trying to sit up. Jerome pushed him back down with a boot to the chest. You're done, he said. Not dead. That would be easy. You'll live long enough to watch everything fall apart. And just like that, Jerome was gone. By the time Calloway dragged himself to his feet and staggered back to his cruiser, bleeding and dazed, Jerome was already watching from 2 blocks away, clean, calm, and untraceable. Phase 1, complete. 2 nights later, it was Vaughn's turn. He was more cautious than Calloway, but not cautious enough. Jerome tracked his routine: an after-hours gym in an industrial park, a cheap liquor store, a late-night diner with greasy burgers, and half-lit parking lots. Vaughn parked behind the diner just after midnight. Jerome was already waiting. This time he didn't attack immediately. He let Vaughn sit in his car for a few minutes, scrolling his phone, looking over his shoulder like he could feel something was off, but not enough to act. When Jerome finally moved, he opened the passenger door so fast Vaughn didn't have time to react. The gun pressed to his temple was cold, but Jerome's voice was colder. Drive. Vaughn's hands trembled. Who the hell are you? Drive. They pulled out in silence. Vaughn's breath ragged, his eyes flicking to the side mirror again and again. Jerome gave directions. Left, right, straight. They ended up in an abandoned warehouse parking lot. Jerome told him to stop, to get out. When Vaughn turned trying to grab for his weapon, Jerome struck, knee to the gut, elbow to the jaw. Vaughn crumpled like a folding chair. Jerome grabbed him by the collar, lifted him to his knees. You don't get to play victim now, he said. Vaughn spat blood. You think this'll make it right? No, Jerome said, but it'll make it stop. He dropped a manila envelope onto the ground next to him. Vaughn stared at it like it might explode. Inside are statements from 3 men you beat in holding cells. Photos, medical records, signed affidavits. I didn't get them. They found me. You've made enemies you didn't even know existed. Vaughn stared up at him, hatred giving way to panic. They're coming for you, Jerome said. Legally, politically, publicly, I'm just the messenger. He turned to leave, but paused. Also, I know about the planted evidence in the Jenkins case. So does the DA now. Then he was gone, and just like with Calloway, Vaughn was left bleeding, broken, and alone. Justice didn't wear a badge that week. It wore scars. It wore grief. And it moved in silence. The email went out at 6:37 a.m. sharp. Jerome sat at his kitchen table, still in the dark except for the faint glow of the laptop screen. He didn't need sleep, not now. Not when he'd spent the last week collecting everything: videos, photos, redacted reports, body cam failures, testimonies from men the system had silenced. Now, with one click, it all went public. He didn't send it anonymously. The email was signed Jerome Carter, Delta Force, retired victim, witness, whistleblower. By 7:12 a.m., 3 local journalists had broken the story. By 8 a.m., the footage of Calloway and Vaughn forcing their way into his home was on every major morning broadcast. By 9:30, the mayor's office issued a rushed, paper-thin statement about deep concern. And by noon, the police department was on fire, from the inside out. The truth had finally caught up, and it didn't knock. It broke down the door. Jerome watched it all unfold from the back of a rideshare, windows tinted, baseball cap low. The news anchor struggled to keep up, each hour revealing another layer: false arrests, falsified reports, complaints dismissed without review, body cams disabled by accident. Names were named, faces were shown, victims were given a platform for the first time, and at the center of it all, 2 disgraced officers and the man they tried to destroy. Calloway and Vaughn had gone silent. No statements, no interviews, just a photo. Calloway ducking into a private security building, face bruised, wearing sunglasses in shame. Vaughn was reportedly on leave, though one leaked memo suggested he had been advised to resign before a suspension could be filed. But it was too late for quiet exits. They had abused their power for years behind closed doors, beneath the weight of a badge, and now every secret was out in the open. Jerome had made sure of it. He had sent copies of the footage to the city council, the district attorney's office, and a state oversight board for law enforcement conduct. He didn't trust the internal affairs division. They had buried too many truths for too long. But now, with pressure from the media and the public swelling by the hour, even the stone-faced bureaucrats had to act. By 3:45 p.m., the police chief held a press conference. "We are deeply disturbed by the footage released today," she said, voice stiff, clearly reading from a teleprompter. "Officers Gregory Calloway and Anthony Vaughn have been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Their conduct, as seen in the video, does not reflect the values of this department." Jerome turned off the TV before she could finish the next lie. He wasn't surprised. They weren't about to admit that Calloway and Vaughn were exactly what the department had become: a mirror of everything rotten that had been allowed to grow unchecked for years. No, they'd isolate them, call them bad apples, and try to escape accountability. But Jerome was already 2 steps ahead. That night, the second wave of footage dropped. It wasn't just about his own experience anymore. Jerome had partnered with 3 former victims, men of color, all arrested or brutalized under suspicious circumstances. He helped them go public, helped them get their voices heard. Their stories hit the news cycle with teeth: broken ribs, planted drugs, fake resisting arrest charges, weeks in jail for walking while black. One headline read, "How many men went to prison because Calloway wanted a win?" The next morning, an emergency city council meeting was held. 3 activists spoke. One public defender read from a stack of 39 complaints, all tied to Calloway and Vaughn. Jerome stood in the back of the chamber, arms crossed, silent, watching the cracks spread wider and deeper. The final blow came when a reporter from the Washington Tribune revealed that both officers had received internal commendations for high arrest rates, rewards that had been incentivized by falsified stops and coerced statements. By the end of the week, the department wasn't just under scrutiny, it was under siege. Civil rights lawyers flooded the courthouse with motions to re-examine every case these 2 men had touched. The district attorney, backed into a corner, announced plans to present the evidence to a grand jury. Jerome finally returned to the station, this time on his terms. He walked through the front doors as cameras flashed. He didn't hide his face, didn't flinch. A group of officers stared from behind the glass walls of the bullpen. Some glared. Others just looked ashamed. He met with Internal Affairs, not for an interview, but to deliver a formal witness statement. The same officers who had once cuffed him now escorted him to the conference room like a guest of honor. "Anything else you'd like to add?" the IA agent asked. Jerome looked her dead in the eyes. "Yeah," he said, "I'm not the only one, and I'm not the last one either." The truth was out, and the system wasn't just cracking, it was breaking, under the weight of every name, every lie, every wound they thought would stay. The courtroom was packed, every bench filled, every wall lined. Reporters, activists, veterans, neighbors, black fathers in tailored suits, mothers with buttons pinned to their jackets, faces of sons and brothers stolen by a system that never apologized. They all came, not just for Jerome Carter, but for the reckoning. For once, it wasn't a black man on trial, it was the system itself. Calloway sat at the defense table, face pale, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. Vaughn beside him, trying to fake calm but twitching at every noise. They weren't in uniform now, no badges, no guns, just two men in cheap suits facing the truth, finally cornered. Jerome sat on the witness stand. He was calm, controlled, not a trace of rage on his face, but his eyes burned, not with hate, with memory, with truth. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Mr. Carter, do you recall what happened on the evening of March 9th? Jerome's voice was steady. "Yes, ma'am. I was walking my dog, a 6-year-old German Shepherd. Name was Duke." A hush fell over the room at the mention of the dog. Everyone knew his story by now, but hearing Jerome say the name made it real again. "I had just returned from a 6-week contract overseas. I do private security work. Former Delta Force." He paused. "It was supposed to be a quiet night." The prosecutor nodded. "What happened next?" Jerome looked directly at Calloway and Vaughn. Neither of them could meet his gaze. "They stopped me. No reason, no crime, just suspicion." He let the word hang in the air. The kind that comes with being black in the wrong neighborhood after dark. There it was. No one dared breathe. They asked where I lived. I told them. Showed ID. They didn't care. They circled me like I was prey. Provoked my dog. Tried to get a rise out of me. When I stayed calm, they escalated. Vaughn reached for my wrist. Duke stepped forward, not even a growl. Just protective instinct. That's when Vaughn pulled the trigger. A woman in the front row stifled a sob. Jerome's jaw tightened. Duke was trained to defend, not attack. He never lunged, never snapped, but they wanted an excuse. The prosecutor let the silence settle. Then, what happened after the shooting? They tackled me, tased me, put me in cuffs with my dog dying at my feet. He looked down for a second, just one, then back up. I begged them to help him. They didn't. They laughed. The jury, 5 women, 7 men, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked sick. "Did you resist arrest?" "No, ma'am. I didn't even speak until they told me I was lucky. It wasn't worse." The prosecutor turned to the judge. "Let the record show the department later confirmed no outstanding warrants, no threats reported, and no reason for the stop. Furthermore, the internal investigation initially cleared the officers until the release of the footage and additional evidence from Mr. Carter." She walked back to her table. "No further questions." The defense attorney stood. He was clean-cut, polished, but it was a losing battle, and he knew it. "Mr. Carter, are you a trained combatant?" "I was, yes." "Would you say your training makes you dangerous?" Jerome raised an eyebrow. "Only to people who try to kill me." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The lawyer tried again. "Is it possible the officers perceived you and your dog as a threat? Is it possible Jerome said calmly. They perceived my skin color as one? The lawyer froze. No further questions. Jerome stepped down. The judge called recess. Reporters bolted for the hallway, calling in sound bites. Activists nodded in grim solidarity. The next day, it was Calloway's turn. He took the stand reluctantly. His voice was unsteady. I did what I was trained to do. We thought he might be dangerous. That dog. He had an ID with his address, the prosecutor snapped. He was walking his dog. Which part was dangerous? Calloway floundered. It's easy to say that now. No further questions. Vaughn refused to testify, cowered to the end. And then came sentencing. The judge, an older black man with silver at his temples and fire in his tone, looked over his glasses and spoke with a weight that shook the room. Officers Calloway and Vaughn, he began, you failed in every way that matters. You were entrusted with power and abused it. You were given the benefit of the doubt again and again, and used it to silence, to intimidate, to violate. He looked toward Jerome. And this man, who had every reason to retaliate with violence, chose to fight with truth, with evidence, with resolve. He turned back. For the charges of aggravated assault, false arrest, misconduct in office, and the use of lethal force without justification, I sentence both of you to 25 years in federal prison. No parole, no plea deals, no backroom negotiations, just justice, finally served. The courtroom exploded into applause. Reporters scrambled. Cameras flashed. But Jerome didn't smile. He just stood, looked at the two men being cuffed, and walked out, calm as ever. It wasn't victory, it was accountability. And for once, that was enough. The cemetery was quiet. Not the kind of eerie silence that haunted a man, but the kind that held weight, that honored, that remembered. Jerome stood alone beside the small gray headstone. Duke, loyal to the end. His fingers brushed the smooth stone. No flowers, no ceremony. Just the wind rustling through the dry winter grass and the distant hum of traffic miles away. The city had moved on, but he hadn't. Not completely. He crouched, laying down a worn photo. Duke sitting proudly beside him in a sunlit backyard. Ears perked, eyes alert. Jerome's arm around his neck. A snapshot of peace, of before. I kept my word, boy, he murmured. They're gone, stripped, caged, just like they wanted for me. The words hung heavy in the air. There was no triumph in his voice, only finality. He sat back on his heels, letting the memories roll in. The bark, the weight of Duke's head resting against his leg during long nights. The way he always stood between Jerome and the world. Never asked, just knew. They called you a threat, he whispered, but you were the only one protecting me. He paused. I couldn't save you, but I made sure they'll never hurt anyone else. That was the truth. The officers who killed Duke, who tried to break Jerome's spirit, were now behind bars. And the system that had once shielded them? Exposed, under investigation. Federal oversight, civil rights suits. A dozen cases reopened. But the cost had been steep. He'd become a symbol, one he never asked to be. A headline, a hashtag, a cautionary tale, and a call to action, all wrapped in a quiet man with military training and nothing left to lose. I wasn't trying to be a hero, he said, standing slowly. I just wanted the truth to matter again. He looked around. No cameras, no microphones. Just the sky, streaked with fading light. Somewhere out there, a kid would walk their dog tonight and not have to worry about being stopped for no reason. Somewhere, a good cop would think twice about turning a blind eye. Somewhere, a courtroom would remember this case and deliver justice faster next time. That was the real win. Not vengeance, not punishment, but change. Jerome turned away from the grave, hands in his pockets, the photo left behind like a final signature. He didn't look back, didn't need to. Duke would always be with him, etched into his story, into every man who'd been silenced and was finally being heard. As he stepped onto the path, he said one last thing, under his breath, but with all the weight of a warning to anyone still listening. Never again. And then he walked into the twilight, not a victim, not a vigilante, but a man who reminded the world what happens when the truth refuses to die.